No one admires you the way you think they do. They do not simply see your success, your beauty, your discipline, your progress, or your rise. They see what those things mean in relation to themselves, and they see what your need to display them quietly reveals about you. That is where the misunderstanding begins. Most people think showing off is a sign of confidence. They think visibility proves value. They think if something gets noticed, it becomes more real. But attention has never been truth. Attention is reaction, and reaction is the cheapest substitute for self-worth. That is why showing off is more serious than it looks. On the surface, it seems harmless. A post, a story, a detail slipped into conversation, a polished image, a milestone placed where other people can see it. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly desperate, just a signal. But the signal often carries more than the object itself. It does not only say, "Look what I have." It says, "I need this to be witnessed so I can fully feel what it means." And once something needs witnesses to feel complete, it is no longer resting on a private foundation. This is the part most people never name correctly. They imagine showing off begins in pride. Very often it begins in uncertainty. A person does not always display what they feel strongest about. They often display what they are least settled in. They show what they need recognized, because recognition temporarily calms whatever still feels unstable inside. That is why someone who looks highly confident can still be deeply dependent. The dependence is not always obvious in the image. It appears in the need behind the image. Think about the hidden equation running underneath this behavior. If I am seen, I feel solid. If I am noticed, I feel important. If I get a response, I feel real in a way that silence could not provide. That equation is rarely spoken out loud, but it governs more behavior than most people want to admit. And it creates a dangerous confusion. It makes visibility feel like value. It makes applause feel like proof. It makes reaction feel like self-knowledge. But none of those things can actually do the work people assign to them, because the moment your worth starts depending on being reflected back to you, your center of gravity moves outward. It no longer sits fully inside your own relationship with yourself. It begins to lean on other people's perception. That shift matters. It means your value is now partly negotiated in public. It means the room has been invited into a private function it was never meant to control. And the more often that happens, the weaker your internal foundation becomes, even if your external image keeps improving. There is another layer people miss. No one receives your display in a purely neutral way. When you show something, the audience is not only looking at you, they are also placing themselves against what they see. Some admire, some compare, some feel motivated, some feel irritated, some feel behind, some feel challenged without wanting to admit it. That does not mean everyone is malicious. It means visible success always enters a field of human measurement. The moment you place your value in front of other people, it becomes part of their internal system too. Still, that is not the deepest danger. The deepest danger is what this habit teaches you. The brain learns quickly. If outside reaction softens inside uncertainty, then the mind starts associating visibility with relief. That is the beginning of dependency. You show. You receive a response. You feel lifted. For a moment, the old doubt grows quieter, and because the relief feels real, the cycle starts building itself. Soon, being seen no longer feels like a bonus. It starts feeling like oxygen. That is when showing off stops being a social style and becomes a psychological strategy. You no longer reveal because you simply want to express something true. You reveal because silence does not hold you strongly enough. You reveal because an unwitnessed victory feels incomplete. You reveal because the moment nobody reflects your progress back to you, part of you begins to question whether it carries full weight at all. That is the contradiction. You show to appear stronger, but the need to show proves where you are still uncertain. Most people do not like this sentence because it sounds accusatory. It is not. It is diagnostic. It is a way of reading the structure honestly. If something truly belonged to you at the level of self-worth, it could remain meaningful before anyone saw it. Not invisible forever, not hidden out of fear, just intact before the audience enters. That distinction matters. A person can share from fullness or share from lack. The action may look similar. The psychology underneath it is not. And if you want to see the difference clearly, ask a brutal question. If no one could witness this at all, would it still feel complete to me? If the answer weakens, then part of the value has already been handed outside. That is not a moral failure. It is a fracture in the relationship between your worth and your reflection. This entire story begins there. Not with arrogance, not with status, with the need to be seen in order to believe what should have already been yours in silence. If that line lands harder than it should, stay with it. Resistance often protects exactly what the ego is not ready to name. The behavior usually becomes visible before the motive does. Almost nobody wakes up and says, "I feel uncertain, so I need an audience today." The process is subtler than that. It hides inside ordinary habits. Someone finds a way to mention the expensive thing before anyone asks. Someone turns a private achievement into public evidence within minutes. Someone makes sure the room knows how desired they are, how disciplined they have become, how much they sacrifice, how much they know, how much they have grown, how different they are from who they used to be. Every act can be justified on the surface, but patterns tell the truth single moments can hide. Look at when the urge tends to appear. After being ignored, people become louder about progress. After rejection, they become louder about desirability. After feeling ordinary, they amplify whatever makes them exceptional. After private doubt, they create public proof. That timing is not random. It exposes the mechanism. Something inside slips, and the person reaches outward before the insecurity settles. The display is not just celebration. It is compensation. That is why people so often show off the exact things they are least at peace with. Someone secure in love does not need every room to feel the relationship. Someone secure in money does not need every interaction to carry traces of wealth. Someone secure in intelligence does not need every conversation to become a stage for superiority. This does not mean grounded people hide everything. It means their sense of value is not organized around immediate reaction. Something can remain true for them even before anyone else confirms it. Many people hate hearing that because it sounds like an accusation against joy itself. It is not. People can be genuinely happy and still share, but there is a difference between joy that overflows and insecurity that seeks a witness. You can feel the difference in the energy of it. One is light, the other is tense. One says, "This happened." The other says, "Tell me what this means about me." One can survive silence. The other starts weakening without response. And response matters in more ways than people admit. The audience is never only observing the object. They are placing themselves in relation to it. They are asking what they lack, where they stand, whether they are behind, whether they should care, whether they should admire, whether they should resist, whether the signal changes the balance between you and them. That is why showing off does not stay private, even when it begins from private need. Once visible, it enters human comparison. Some people will be inspired, some will quietly withdraw, some will feel challenged, some will measure themselves against you and say nothing. Some will become colder without fully knowing why. Visible signals do that. They turn you into a reference point. Not always respected, not always envied, but measured. And when people start measuring themselves against what you display, your image no longer belongs only to you. It has entered a field you do not control. Still, The bigger issue is not what happens in them, it is what has already begun happening in you. The more often you use visibility to regulate uncertainty, the more your nervous system starts reaching for exposure whenever inner stability drops. That habit can look normal because modern life rewards it. It can be called sharing, authenticity, documenting growth, letting people in, telling your story, celebrating the journey, building a presence. Sometimes those names are accurate. Often they are cleaner labels covering an older need. Please confirm that I still matter. This is why even pain can become performance. Even healing can become display. Even restraint can become branding. A person can show off suffering, maturity, standards, detachment, wisdom, or humility if those things have become identity markers tied to worth. The object changes. The structure stays the same. Something inside wants confirmation, so something outside gets arranged to produce it. That is also why irritation toward showing off is so common. People are not usually offended by confidence itself. They are reacting to the pressure underneath the signal. They feel the transaction, even if they cannot articulate it. Look at this. Respond to this. Recognize what this says about my value. Confirm the version of me that I am putting in front of you. That pressure makes people uneasy. It turns presence into extraction. It asks the room to participate in stabilizing someone else's self-image. And nearly everyone has done this in some form. That matters. This is not a story about shallow people only. It is a story about a common human weakness. When inner definition weakens, outside reflection becomes more tempting. When silence feels empty, display starts looking reasonable. When self-worth feels uncertain, almost any visible proof can start feeling like medicine. But medicine is not the same as healing. And that distinction is what most people spend years avoiding. They keep improving the signal instead of questioning the dependency. They keep trying to look more convincing instead of asking why being unwitnessed feels so incomplete. That is why the behavior persists, even in successful people, even in intelligent people, even in people who genuinely have something real to show, because the real issue is not the thing being displayed. It is the private instability that keeps asking the audience to finish the meaning of it. Once you see the pattern clearly, the mechanism becomes easier to name. Showing off is not just social behavior, it is a nervous system strategy for managing uncertainty through visibility. That is why the act never fully ends at the moment of expression. If it were only expression, it would feel complete once it was expressed. But many people do not feel complete there. They feel suspended. They wait. They check. They monitor. They revisit. The response is part of the act. And that is how you know the behavior is carrying more psychological weight than the person wants to admit. The person showing off is rarely chasing the object itself. The watch is not the point. The body is not the point. The promotion, the room, the partner, the transformation, the discipline, the access, the exclusivity, none of it is the final target. The target is the internal shift that arrives after recognition. For a brief moment, the response reorganizes self-perception. The private voice of doubt grows quieter. The person feels more real, more solid, more elevated, more certain. That temporary lift gets mistaken for confidence. In reality, it is borrowed stability. Borrowed stability always charges interest. Once the mind learns that attention can reduce uncertainty, attention stops feeling optional. It becomes emotionally loaded. Praise no longer lands as a pleasant addition. It starts functioning as regulation. Silence no longer feels neutral. It starts carrying too much meaning. Indifference becomes sharper. Weak response becomes suspicious. Comparison becomes more painful. This is how an external audience quietly enters the architecture of identity. And once that happens, behavior changes in ways people rarely notice. They begin selecting what is most likely to produce confirmation. They repeat what gets reaction. They hide what does not. They shape expression around reward without calling it that. Over time, they stop asking, "What is true for me?" They start asking, "What version of me lands best?" The shift is subtle, but it is decisive. The self begins reorganizing around reflection. This is where strategic readability enters the picture. When you repeatedly display the same kinds of things for validation, you do not only ask for reaction, you also leak information about what your ego is built on. You reveal what you attach worth to. You reveal which identity pillars carry your confidence. You reveal what you most need recognized. And once that pattern becomes visible, other people do not need to know you deeply to read you accurately. The display becomes a map. If you repeatedly show wealth, people learn that financial power is tied to your self-definition. If you repeatedly show desirability, they learn that being chosen matters deeply to you. If you repeatedly show discipline, they learn that you need moral superiority or self-mastery to feel elevated. If you repeatedly show intelligence, they learn that being seen as foolish would cut deeper than you want to admit. This does not mean everyone becomes an enemy. It means you become legible in a way you did not intend. The more worth depends on witnesses, the easier it becomes to see what kind of witness matters most to you. That matters because human beings do not respond neutrally to visible imbalance. They may admire you, but they also place themselves against you. They may respect your rise, but they also feel what it says about their own position. They may smile while quietly recalculating the distance between what you have and what they lack. None of this has to become open conflict to affect your life. A person can shift in warmth, closeness, generosity, openness, or trust without ever saying why. Visible signals change social gravity, but again, this is still secondary. The core problem is not that the world can read you. The core problem is that you are teaching yourself to rely on the world. Readability only becomes dangerous because dependence exists first. If your value were internally anchored, other people's measurements would have less power. Their reactions could still matter emotionally, but they would not function as support beams. What creates fragility is the combination. You become easier to read at the same time that you need the reading to go well. That is a weak structure, even when it looks impressive. And this explains why some highly visible people become increasingly restless as they become more admired. The audience is growing, but so is dependence. The image is stronger, but the self is less free. The reactions are larger, but silence becomes harder to tolerate. What looks like social assent may secretly be psychological captivity. The person keeps building an image that brings relief, while simultaneously making themselves more dependent on the conditions that produce that relief. This is why the phrase "just being myself" should not always be trusted. People often mistake repeated regulation for authentic expression. They no longer see the strategy because the strategy has become familiar. It feels natural only because it has been rehearsed so often. But familiar does not mean free. A habit can feel personal and still be compensatory. The clearest test remains brutally simple. If no one could see this, would it still feel whole? If no one applauded, would it still feel valuable? If no one reflected it back, would it still hold its meaning? The answer exposes whether you are sharing from substance or borrowing certainty from perception. And once that answer is honest, the deeper fracture starts showing itself. The real issue is not attention by itself. It is what silence awakens when attention is absent. Most people stop too early in their understanding of this problem. They think the issue is wanting too much attention. They think the issue is ego, vanity, status, hunger, or a bad social habit. But those explanations remain shallow because they stay on the surface of the behavior. The real break happens when the question turns inward and becomes more severe. What exactly does silence threaten? Why does the absence of witnesses make some people feel smaller, weaker, less certain, or strangely unreal? This is where the whole subject changes. Showing off is not fundamentally about enjoying visibility. It is about not being able to hold your own worth strongly enough in silence. That is the deeper fracture, when no one reacts, no one notices, no one reflects your progress back to you, and no one confirms the version of yourself you want to believe in. An old instability rises. Maybe I am not enough without an audience. Maybe the achievement is flatter than I thought if nobody sees it. Maybe I only feel valuable when value becomes visible. That is the wound hidden inside the display. So the person is not only chasing attention, they are often chasing relief from self-doubt. Attention is just the vehicle. What they truly want is the temporary suspension of inner questioning. For a short time, response makes the identity feel coherent. For a short time, the room returns an image that is easier to inhabit than silence. For a short time, the person does not have to sit with the possibility that worth may not be stable on its own. That is why the behavior persists long after it stops being satisfying. It is not feeding joy. It is medicating uncertainty. Once you see that, the image changes meaning immediately. The polished display no longer reads like overflow, it reads like management. The confidence no longer sounds fully confident. The visibility no longer feels free. It feels organized around a private weakness. And that is much harder to admit, because now the issue is not the audience anymore. The issue is your relationship with your own value. This is why a person can have real success and still show off compulsively. External achievement does not automatically create internal certainty. Sometimes it only gives insecurity better materials to work with. A person can be genuinely beautiful, successful, disciplined, desired, and still use all of those things as emotional scaffolding. The problem is not that the achievement is fake. The problem is that the self has started using the achievement as proof of existence. And proof of existence always demands another witness. This also explains why weak reaction can feel so destabilizing. If the display was carrying the burden of self-worth, then muted response does not just disappoint the ego, it reactivates the original wound. The person feels agitated, sharper, louder, or strangely deflated because the confirmation did not land strongly enough. That moment tells the truth about the structure. If a person can share something and return to themselves peacefully, even when the response is light, the act was probably clean. If weak response throws them back into doubt, the act was never only about expression. The same is true of silence after praise fades. Watch what happens then. Does the person still feel whole, or do they feel the need to intensify the signal, improve the image, produce a bigger reveal, create fresh proof, or remind the room again? That urge is not random. It is what happens when identity has been tied too tightly to reflection. The person is not trying to celebrate more. They are trying to repair a feeling of internal collapse. That is the perception break. Showing off does not simply reveal arrogance. It reveals instability in the relationship between inner worth and outer reflection. And once that is named correctly, a lot of false explanations collapse. The problem is not that people are shallow in a simple sense. Many deeply wounded people can look shallow because they are trying to solve an old insecurity with visible symbols. The problem is not that they only want status. Status is often just socially admired reassurance. The problem is not that they want to be seen. Human beings need recognition. The problem is that unseen value no longer feels stable enough to trust. That is the line most people never cross in their thinking. They keep analyzing the display. They do not analyze what silence says to the person who needs to display. And silence says something brutal to them. It says, "You are on your own," without reflection. It says, your progress has no witness. It says, your difference is not entering the room. It says, your worth is not currently being verified. For someone with an internally anchored sense of self, none of that destroys value. For someone dependent on visibility, it can feel like erosion. This is where the need to be seen becomes more than a social habit. It becomes a way of defending against emotional disappearance. That is why the title has to be read carefully. Showing off means you need to be seen to feel worthy, not because your life is fake, not because your achievements are unreal, but because your worth still needs witnesses before it fully settles into you. That is a much darker truth than simple vanity. And it is also a more useful one, because once the problem is named as dependence on reflection, the whole structure becomes visible. You do not only see why the display happens, you see what it has been protecting all along. Now the philosophical core appears. The need to be seen is not shameful. Human beings are relational from the beginning. We learn ourselves partly through response. We are touched, shaped, and stabilized by recognition. So the desire to be seen is not the problem. The problem begins when being seen becomes proof of worth instead of an experience added to worth. That is where the structure quietly mutates. Recognition stops being human nourishment and starts becoming identity support. The change is gradual. A person notices what gets approval and feels drawn toward repeating it. They notice what gets ignored and start shrinking it. They discover which version of themselves generates the strongest response, and that version begins taking over more space. This does not happen because people are always fake in some theatrical sense. It happens because the mind moves toward whatever softens uncertainty fastest. If one version of you gets reflected back warmly and another version disappears into silence, the reflected version starts feeling safer to inhabit. That is how people begin outsourcing self-worth without naming it. They edit themselves around reaction. They select what remains visible. They amplify what earns praise. They hide what does not fit the image that keeps them emotionally upright. Over time, the question changes from what is true for me to what keeps me legible, admired, respected, desired, or elevated in the eyes of others. This is not always conscious. That is what makes it dangerous. The system can feel natural, even while it is slowly reorganizing identity around external confirmation, and the cost is profound. Once your value depends on reflection, your relationship with yourself becomes strategic. You no longer meet yourself as a whole. You meet yourself as a set of signals to manage. The polished parts get reinforced. The unfinished parts get hidden. The ordinary parts get neglected. The inconsistent parts get edited out. A person can still call this growth, discipline, refinement, personal evolution, or standards. Sometimes that language is true, but sometimes it is a more elegant name for internal fragmentation. This is why many visible people feel deeply unseen. The audience is responding, but often to a selected version designed for reaction. Approval lands on the managed surface, not on the whole self. So even when attention is abundant, something remains unconvinced. The reaction is real, but it is not reaching every part of the person. The image is visible, but the deeper self remains uncertain whether it would still be valued without all the arrangement. That is one of the most painful contradictions in the entire pattern. The person seeks visibility to feel real, but the more they edit themselves for visibility, the less fully real they feel. Read that slowly. They gain audience and lose contact. They gain reaction and lose internal solidity. They become easier to recognize from the outside and harder to recognize from within. That is the real damage. Not simply envy, not simply judgment, not even simply dependence on praise. The deepest cost is fragmentation. One self performs, another self waits in silence. One self gets reinforced, another self gets left behind. There is also a philosophical error at the center of this. Market value gets mistaken for self-worth. Market value is always unstable. It changes with comparison, taste, timing, context, trend, and the attention span of other people. If your worth starts functioning like market value, then your identity becomes vulnerable to every shift in the room. You can feel strong in one context and diminished in another without anything essential about you actually changing. That is not grounded self-worth. That is public pricing. Public pricing is exhausting. It must be maintained. It must be updated. It must remain visible enough to keep producing certainty. This is why people who rely on display often feel pressure even when they are winning. They are not only living life, they are carrying an identity that requires upkeep. And upkeep is not peace. Upkeep is labor. It is the hidden labor of translating life into evidence and then waiting for the crowd to convert that evidence into reassurance. Once you see this, the title becomes heavier. Showing off means you need to be seen to feel worthy because the self has forgotten how to feel worthy before the witness arrives. That is the deepest surrender, not to the audience as individuals, but to reflection as a principle. The inner foundation weakens and the person starts using mirrors as architecture. That is why showing off never stays a harmless habit for long. It changes what counts as enough. It changes what feels real. It changes what kinds of experiences can still live privately without losing meaning. A person can end up respecting only the parts of themselves that attract response. The rest begins to feel less important, less lovable, less safe, less alive. That is not confidence. That is selective self-acceptance organized around applause. And selective self-acceptance always produces a quiet civil war inside the personality. One part shines, another part waits. Now the paradox reaches its sharpest point. Showing more feels like expansion. It feels active, deliberate, and powerful because you are choosing the image, choosing the timing, choosing the frame, choosing how perception will meet you. On the surface, it looks like control. But psychologically, the movement often points in the opposite direction. The more your worth depends on being seen, the less control you actually have. You may control the signal. You do not control the need behind the signal. And the need is what holds the real power. That is why people can look highly confident while remaining deeply dependent. If praise is needed to stabilize you, then praise is no longer a gift. It is a supply. If reaction is needed to complete your sense of value, then reaction is no longer optional. It is structural. If silence makes you restless, then silence has leverage. This is the part many people refuse to face. The audience does not need to attack you. They do not need to envy you openly. They do not even need to misunderstand you. They only need to stop reacting with the intensity you have trained yourself to depend on. When that happens, the structure reveals itself fast. Restlessness appears, stronger signals are prepared, bigger proof becomes tempting. The person starts intensifying the image, not because life suddenly became richer, but because the previous level of response no longer produces the same internal effect. Dependency always raises the dose. What looked like self-expression starts behaving like maintenance. What looked like confidence starts behaving like withdrawal management. This is where the strategic edge matters, but only as a consequence, not as the core. Once worth depends on witnesses, you become easier to read because your reactions start following visible patterns. People notice what unsettles you, what inflates you, what themes you return to, what identity markers keep needing reinforcement. They do not need to become masterminds to sense it. Human beings are good at reading where another person's ego still needs support. Sometimes they respond with admiration, sometimes with caution, sometimes with distance, sometimes with subtle interference. Sometimes they simply learn that silence moves you more than it should. But again, the deeper problem is not them. The deeper problem is that your center of gravity has already shifted outward. Because it has shifted outward, the environment can affect you more easily. Because it has shifted outward, response carries too much force. Because it has shifted outward, your own internal state becomes vulnerable to fluctuations that should not have had that much power in the first place. Readability is the consequence. Dependence is the cause. There is another contradiction hidden inside this pattern. Many people say they want to be seen for who they really are, but what they often mean is that they want a selected image to be positively confirmed. Real visibility is riskier than that. Real visibility includes misunderstanding, indifference, incomplete recognition, and the possibility that people will not return the version of you that you were hoping for. So, instead of tolerating that uncertainty, people often build displays that guide interpretation towards safer conclusions. The irony is severe. They seek validation for an image because validation for the whole self feels too unstable to survive. This is why progress can increase the problem rather than solve it. More beauty, more money, more discipline, more achievement, more social proof, more access, more admiration. None of those things automatically free a person from dependence on reflection. They may just give the person better materials with which to continue negotiating worth. The performance improves. The insecurity becomes harder to detect. The public identity becomes sharper, but the core can remain just as hungry as before, sometimes hungrier. And when the core stays hungry, every silence grows teeth. That is the brutal truth of dependence. It changes the meaning of quiet. Quiet is no longer rest. It becomes uncertainty. It becomes absence of proof. It becomes an empty space where the old doubt returns. The person is not simply trying to be noticed more. They are trying to outrun the psychological tension that appears whenever no witness is available to hold their image together. So the issue is no longer whether showing off works in the short term. Of course it does. It produces reaction. The issue is what it trains the mind to need. If every display teaches you that certainty must arrive from outside, then every display is also teaching you distrust of your unobserved worth. That is how people lose freedom without noticing, not by being seen, by needing to be seen before they can believe themselves. And once that structure hardens, other people stop feeling like people in a subtle way. Their attention becomes fuel, their response becomes data, their silence becomes threat. The relationship to the audience becomes less about connection and more about regulation. That is another hidden price. Even admiration starts feeling impersonal when it is being used as medicine. The final paradox is simple. You show in order to feel stronger. But the more you need to show, the more you confess where you are still weak. And nothing makes a person more vulnerable than needing the world to keep proving what they cannot yet hold alone. By now, the title should no longer sound like a surface observation. Showing off means you need to be seen to feel worthy, because showing off is not merely display. It is not just an ego habit. It is not just vanity, status signaling, or a noisy personality style. At its deepest level, it is a hidden equation between visibility and value. If I am witnessed, I feel more real. If I am confirmed, I feel more solid. If I am reflected back, I can believe myself more easily. That equation is what gives the behavior its force, and it is what quietly drains the person who lives inside it. This is why the final issue is not whether you share things publicly. People can share honestly. People can celebrate without collapsing into dependence. People can let themselves be seen without making visibility carry the burden of identity. The line is not between silence and expression. The line is between expression that comes from private certainty and expression that is secretly asking the audience to finish the feeling of worth. The action may look similar, The structure underneath it is completely different. Once worth depends on witnesses, life itself begins changing shape. Experiences are no longer lived only as experiences. They are also scanned for display value. Achievements are no longer simply enjoyed. They are measured by how convincingly they can enter perception. Progress is no longer enough to be progress. It starts asking to become evidence. Even joy can lose weight if nobody mirrors it back. This is how a person ends up carrying an invisible observer inside themselves. Part of them is always asking, what will this say about me? How will this land? What identity does this confirm? What reaction will this produce? Who will see? Who will compare? Who will recognize that I matter now? That observer creates exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of failure, but the exhaustion of maintenance. The endless labor of converting life into proof. The quiet burden of keeping an identity believable by keeping it visible. Some people think they are tired from ambition alone. Often, they are tired from the hidden work of repeatedly translating existence into signals strong enough to fight off old uncertainty. The outside may call it confidence. The inside often experiences it as pressure. This is also why visibility can produce loneliness. The audience may know the image, but the person can still feel unknown. They receive reaction, but not necessarily contact. They receive recognition, but not always for the whole self. They are seen where they are curated and ignored where they are unperformed. The more heavily they invest in the curated version, the harder it becomes to know whether anything less arranged would still be lovable, respectable, or enough. So they keep feeding the image while becoming less sure of what remains beneath it. That is the real cost. Not simply that people compare. Not simply that the environment reads you. Not simply that reaction becomes addictive. Those are all true, but they are not the center. The center is that your value starts leaving home. It starts living in reflection, in reaction, in witness, in proof, in signals, in other people's measurement. And once value keeps leaving home, the self cannot fully rest. Most people never notice the handover while it is happening. It feels innocent at first. You share one thing, then another, and each reaction seems small enough to justify. But little by little, your inner life starts waiting at the door of perception before it grants itself permission to feel complete. That is the theft. Not public judgment. Not comparison. The theft is that your own experience no longer fully belongs to you until it has been translated into something other people can recognize. And once that happens, even success begins to feel rented. You may hold it, display it, and defend it, but part of its meaning sits outside your reach, exposed to the instability of every room, every timeline, every shifting mood, every fading response. That is not strength. That is dependency, wearing polished clothes and calling itself confidence. And dependence always asks for more, while giving less with each return. So what finally destroys a person here is not exposure by itself. It is internal surrender. It is the moment being seen becomes necessary for feeling worthy. It is the moment unwitnessed value starts feeling incomplete. It is the moment silence becomes too weak to hold what applause has been holding for you. That is why the issue cannot be solved by becoming more mysterious, more strategic, more hidden, or more severe as a role. Those can become new performances. The real shift happens when something good can remain good before anyone sees it, when a private win still feels whole, when progress still matters in an empty room, when a beautiful thing does not need an audience before it becomes fully real to you. That is not antisocial. It is structural sanity. It is the recovery of a center of gravity that does not collapse every time reflection disappears. And once that center returns, everything changes. You can still be visible, but visibility stops functioning as medication. You can still receive praise, but praise is no longer a support beam. You can still be misunderstood, ignored, or lightly received without translating those moments into proof that you are less. People do not get destroyed because they are seen. They get destroyed when being seen becomes the only way they can believe they are worth seeing at all. That is the line. That is the hidden wound. And that is why the need to show is never only about what you have. It is about what your silence still cannot hold. The world may read your signal. The room may measure your rise. Other people may place themselves against what you display. But the deepest truth remains simpler than all of that. You did not keep reaching outward because you were full. You kept reaching outward because reflection was doing a job that self-worth had not yet learned to do alone. And until that changes, no amount of visibility will ever feel like enough. Because the audience can react. The audience can admire. The audience can compare. The audience can confirm an image. But no audience can permanently answer the private question that started the performance. Am I still enough when no one is looking?